It's the leading cause of death in the United States. 1 in 3 women will die every year from heart disease, and 1 in 4 men will die from heart disease. The interesting thing about vascular disease is it begins long before we actually realize we have a problem. So it begins years before we finally present with that heart attack. We always want to be proactive. We want to keep the blood vessels healthy. We want to prevent disease from developing. And so it's really important to understand how and where cardiovascular disease starts. So this is the anatomy of a blood vessel. And I just want to break it down so anybody can understand this. And I just think of it as 3 different parts, kind of like a pipe. This is your lumen. And then the lining of a blood vessel is actually just 1 cell layer thick. And this is what we call the endothelium. And it's very interesting because it's very similar to the gut. The gut is lined by only 1 cell layer thick. So it's interesting. And then on the outside of this 1 cell layer thickness, we have smooth muscle. And so this is how your blood vessels either can contract, be stiff, or they can relax. And the smooth muscle is very important, obviously, it's one of the key regulators of blood flow. Plaque formation, how does this begin? And so plaque formation begins right here where we start getting damage to the endothelial wall. And if we want to prevent plaque formation, we want to start here to try to prevent the damage to the endothelial wall. Once damage occurs, we get inflammation. We then will get plaque formation, and then you begin getting a little bit of narrowing of the blood vessel, and then you get more plaque formation. You can get a clotting cascade. It can occur very suddenly. The plaque can suddenly occlude the blood vessel. Plaque can rupture, it can break off, and it can lodge, more distally. And anytime, obviously, when part of the heart doesn't get oxygen, we have a heart attack. So endothelial damage. So what begins to cause this damage to the endothelium? It can be caused by inflammation, oxidative stress, infections, high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, smoking, obesity, and a sedentary lifestyle. And again, it occurs before there's any visible vascular changes. And even though we're focusing on the heart today, I just want to just mention that this occurs everywhere in the body. So you can have vascular disease that is occurring in the arteries that feed your brain and the arteries that feed your kidney. So it's not really just isolated to the heart. When I was at this conference, the cardiologist, who's kind of one of the leading cardiologists in functional medicine, really presented some data and some studies raising a new way of thinking about atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. In fact, they're beginning to wonder if part of what happens is actually the inflammation is tied to what is possibly an infectious process. With all the new technology that we've had in terms of being able to use DNA analysis and identify organisms, they have looked at plaque on autopsies, and using DNA sequencing, they've identified organisms that are trapped within the plaque. In fact, so there's some thinking that maybe part of this is actually an infectious disease process. They have identified bacteria from the mouth, from the gut. They've even found H. pylori and even viruses like herpes in the plaque. And again, when you have organisms that are trapped in this plaque, you're going to have an inflammatory response. So that's why partially today we were going to have a talk on the oral microbiome, because that's very much tied, to heart disease. So the gut and the mouth are important areas to try to be healthy. This is a great slide. This is how do we prevent endothelial damage? We need a strong and healthy endothelium, which is dependent on a glycocalyx. And so what is a glycocalyx? So this is a cross-section, I think it's of a rat arteriole. Here is your 1 cell layer endothelium. And this kind of darker, kind of shaggy, fuzzy is what is called your glycocalyx. So the glycocalyx is actually a gel-like layer that overlies the endothelium. And it looks very much like finger-like projections. It is meant to move. It's made up of carbohydrates, fats, and protein. So a very healthy glycocalyx is one that can flow freely, especially as blood vessels and different molecules pass by. Here's an even more close in view. You've got your lumen. Here's what this glycocalyx looks like, and down here are your endothelial cells. So diving into the glycocalyx, why is it important? It's important because damage to the glycocalyx precedes damage to the endothelium. So when this becomes damaged, then we begin to develop atherosclerosis. And damaged glycocalyx, another way to think of it, is like leaky blood vessels. Again, very similar to the gut. We damage our gut lining, we get a leaky gut lining. So the glycocalyx is important because it is your first line of defense. It protects the artery, it regulates inflammation, it prevents molecules like cholesterol from sticking to the arterial wall. And the motion of these fibers as they go back and forth, it generates nitric oxide, which probably in the last 20 years, researchers have realized that this is the key to keeping your blood vessels healthy. Nitric oxide acts on the smooth muscle on the other side of the endothelium to relax it. So nitric oxide causes relaxation of the smooth muscle and you get vasodilation. So here is a healthy glycocalyx. You have the blood flowing by. Here's your endothelial cell, and this is generating nitric oxide, which is then acting on the smooth muscle to relax the blood vessel. Here is an example of a healthy artery. You've got a nice healthy glycocalyx. The blood is flowing, the glycocalyx is moving, and you're getting nitric oxide produced. So this is a healthy elastic vessel, and this is an unhealthy stiff vessel. You see the damaged glycocalyx. We do not see much nitric oxide being produced, so therefore this blood vessel is stiff. So damaged glycocalyx, you have less nitric oxide and it's more susceptible to damage and you get stiffer blood vessels. So we know when you have atherosclerosis, especially advanced disease, we have stiff blood vessels and can have high blood pressure. This is a great slide. I'm sure it looks very scientific. This is healthy. Here's your blood. Here's a healthy glycocalyx. And endothelial cells are attached to each other through an intercellular junction. You want this junction to be tight. Down here, we start to see some damage to the glycocalyx. The intercellular junction is still intact, but it's a little bit weakened. And then here, we have more damage to the glycocalyx. The junction is broken. And now you can get bacteria and inflammatory molecules that can come into the cell and come in between the junctions and therefore start contributing to plaque formation. How do we maintain a healthy glycocalyx? Similar to the villi in your small intestine, it's susceptible to damage, but it can be healed or at least reversed. Tips for keeping a healthy glycocalyx include reducing inflammation, healthy diet, healthy lifestyle, obviously controlling your blood pressure, glucose regulation, and there are supplements out there that have been shown to help repair the glycocalyx and actually generate nitric oxide production in a very consistent way. I just wanted to briefly mention, I find this so interesting, the glycocalyx was discovered in 1963. They were able to identify it, but they had no idea really its role until 1998, when these three scientists actually discovered the mechanism of how nitric oxide was produced and that it was a signaling molecule in the cardiovascular system. And this was really where the pieces started being put together about the importance of nitric oxide. Again, the function of nitric oxide is relaxing smooth muscles. It helps maintain blood pressure. And this is just a quick slide because I think sometimes these chemistry terms can become a little bit confusing, but nitric oxide is just one nitrogen, one oxygen. Again, we're talking about the gas that's made naturally in the body, causes vasodilation. Nitric oxide is two nitrogens, one oxygen. This is laughing gas, used as an anesthetic or for pain relief in dentistry and surgery. And then when you hear people talk about nitrates, 1 nitrogen, 3 oxygen. It's a compound that is found in food. It can be converted to nitric oxide in the body and supports heart and exercise performance. And next up is Lexi, and she's going to take us into a little bit deeper dive in terms of nutrition and its role with nitric oxide and the glycocalyx. Thanks so much.